Hi, everyone. Welcome to Rabbit Room Apologetics. I'm Mark Bates, and Happy New Year. So, we finished up last year on December 28th, and then I took basically 2 weeks off, and we're starting up today for January. What I finished December with was several discussions on biblical theology, which is why you want to potentially pay attention to my channel here. And I was answering some of the more troubling videos I put out there where people were throwing all kinds of questions at me, and the ones that got the most views. So we're going to finish up with that. There was one that got a lot of views that people were just throwing a lot of questions at me, and that was on the new evidence on did Herod the Great die in 1 BC versus 4 BC. And one of the main questions I got from a lot of people is, why does it matter? So we want to talk about that. All right. So the other thing you'll notice is that I'm changing how I'm doing things a little bit here. Hopefully, this is the screenshot you're going to see along with me is the my Logos screen. And what I want to do here is give you some idea of how I use Logos and why I like this product so well for my Bible study. So if you're interested in it, there will be a link where you get a discount if you're not using Logos in the description. So just think about that. So why is the Herod so important to us? So, and here's why. We start here in Matthew chapter 2, where we're talking about the wise men coming in to visit the newly born king of Judea, right? Or king of Israel. And they're asking Herod. So the question here is, if Matthew's account is accurate, and we will accept that there is accuracy in the Bible, okay, that's just an underlying statement that I'll make here, that we assume accuracy in there. Doesn't mean that we expect accuracy in terms of literal accuracy, especially if something is definitely not a literal statement, but something that is an allusion or an analogy, right? Those are not necessarily 100% literally accurate per se, but we're saying for basic facts the accuracy is there, and this becomes very important when you're dealing with apologetics and people who say that the Bible may not be true. And one of the things hedges on this one. So we got the wise men coming in and visiting Herod. So Herod has to be alive at this point, because Matthew doesn't say anything about Herod being dead. So if Herod died in 4 BC, that means that the wise men came before that, which would make it maybe 5 BC, right? Or maybe even 6 BC. I don't know how early we want to date this, right? And that throws a lot of other dating off. Okay, so we got to be, you just have a problem with that, right? Of Herod dying in 4 BC, that puts Christ's birth, according to Matthew, well before that, right? At least maybe a year, maybe more, right? Maybe 2 years. And so that throws a lot of other things out. Now, what you'll notice is I'm looking at the Christian Standard Bible. This is my standard Bible that my congregation uses, that I attend. So I just like this one. It's nice to have. I also have the Net Bible. I like the Net Bible because it's a great English translation of the Bible. And what I really like about it is that you do have access to what they call their edition notes, where they tell you what they were thinking, why they did certain things, okay? The other product I use a great deal is the English Standard Version. And what you'll notice here is I use the interlinear here on the English Standard Version, where I can see not only the English translation, but what was the underlying text in the original language, Greek or Hebrew or such, right? And gives me a lot of clues on what to look for here. So I do a lot of work in the original languages. So that's why I like having this access. But I'm going to stay here because we're staying in the English. So we're starting here in Matthew, and we have the wise men. And if the wise men came and talked to Herod, it has to be, if we assume a 4 BC date for Herod dying, then it has to be before that. So let's say 5 BC. Well, this causes us a problem when we get into Luke, right? So here's the birth, right? Sequence here. And what we want to talk about here is not the prophecy of Zechariah, but the birth of Jesus here. And the fact that we're talking about here, in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole empire should be registered. This first registration took place while Quirinius was governing Syria. This is a problem if we read this in English, because Quirinius was governor of Syria in 680, right? Or 6 CE, depending on if you like the AD or you like the CE designations. It's the same year. This causes a problem. One, this places Jesus' birth at around 6 CE, 6 AD, right? But it also means that it's a contradiction with Matthew. And if the Bible's accurate, how do you get a major contradiction between Luke and Matthew? And we're talking about 10 plus years of contradiction here, right? That's pretty big. I mean, a month I could say, it just could be a scribal error or something. So something's up here. So what's up here, and I answered one of the people who threw the, and by the way, this is an old problem that the skeptics have been throwing at Christian apologists for, hundreds, thousands of years, right? It's just, this is nothing new here. Okay, so the first problem here is when the Greek says Quirinius was governing Syria, governing does not necessarily mean he was the governor of Syria. It means he's one of the leaders in Syria. And we do know Quirinius was one of the leaders in Syria. He was not the governor yet. It was not a Roman province yet, right? So he was in power to some degree in Syria at that point. So if you're just reading the English, right, you have a potential problem there. And if we look at the Net Bible translation, right, we can see a couple of issues here. Caesar Augustus here refers to Octavian, who was Caesar from 27 BC to AD 14. So we're not talking about Augustus, who would have been definitely a different time frame, right? So this fits within a birth of Jesus being somewhere closer to when Herod was alive, okay? And then the census, right? This is a disputed historical event, right? And so they're talking about 86, which is much too late, right? But here's the issue that I want to get to, right? So Quirinius has this registration. It's not necessarily a census, right? So the question is this a Roman census or is this a Jewish census? And what gives us the hint here is everyone was told to go to their hometown as far as where their family's from, right? So Joseph had to go to Nazareth, right? Where he was living. He had to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem, right? Which is where his family line is from. The Romans really didn't care a whole lot about your family line. They cared about just counting the people properly for tax purposes. The people who cared about your family line were the Jews. So this is not a Roman census per se. This is a registration, and it's being conducted by Jewish authorities. And this is what I'm suggesting here, right? So we have that. Now, the other thing that's very important here is because we have this Herod date now, right? Well, if Herod, we know Herod supposedly died at 4, but the new scholarly consensus is, and the preponderance of evidence that the new scholars are going by is that Herod died at 1 BC. So now it fits very well that if Herod was alive, let's say just before 1 BC, maybe 2 BC, that the Christ would have been born, right? Somewhere between 2 and 1 BC, right? Which would have fit, as I predicted, as I was talking about, the Revelation 12 star signs that John quotes from, which look for the birth of the virgin from the virgin male child to be in 1 BC, because that's when that all the star signs align properly. Okay, and that would have been not in December, but would have been in September during the Jewish month of Yom Teruah. We'll talk more about calendars and why it's really difficult to give you an exact date that matches our Gregorian calendars that we backdated, right? But just understand, we're talking about that event, and there's lots of reasons for that event to occur at that point. So it's very important because if Herod's death really occurred at 4 BC, right? And if this was the Quirinius registration was actually a Roman census when Quirinius was governor of Syria, that would have been 6 AD. Well, now we have a conflict between them, and we got to make sure we understand the Bible properly, not to have this conflict. This is an old one. We've handled this before, those of us in apologetics, but just to let you know. So it is there. We do handle these problems. If you see these issues, let me know. Thank you very much, and have a great new year once again. Hope everyone had a very safe holiday season.